Okay, I guess it's now 2 o'clock. Maybe we might officially maybe start the session, Sister Villa. Maybe let me start by welcoming everyone to the session itself. Welcome to the second session of the science communication training that we host. We hope to have it on a quarterly basis, but then it's not always possible. And then today we have the privilege of having Ms. Tembila Mantungwa from the South African Astronomical Observatory. And then just to give like a brief background of our speaker today. So Mrs. Tembela Mantungwa has a master's degree in public relations and is currently pursuing her PhD in media and communication. She has extensive experience in communication spanning over 10 years, and she works at the South African Astronomical Observatory. And she's currently the acting executive officer of the African Astronomical Society, as well as the chair of the communication committee. And lastly, her research interests are in relational communication, in particular, the way in which science institutes engage with society. Right. With that brief background, I'll hand over to our speaker today,
Hmm.
Mrs. Timber.
Yes. Hello everyone. I think technology is challenging me somehow. Can you still see my screen, Lebuko, on your side?
Yes, we can see your screen, but it's not in presentation mode, though.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't understand why. Can you see now?
Yes, now it's in presentation mode.
Perfect. Okay. So I so I so Duduzile and I kind of had a survey that looked at what it is that astronomers and people who are doing science communication are interested in learning when we talk about communication. Because everyone does communication, but we do it differently. And we don't know if it lands well or if it doesn't land well. And in this case, knowing what the needs are instead of doing the same thing over and over again is helpful because otherwise, while we are complaining or while we have concerns about whether our messages to the general public lands, we might also not have a message that lands within the science communication groups or community. So this was interesting because many of the topics that are listed there, you have storytelling, you have public speaking, psychology of people and all of that. All of these things hinge on storytelling. So I think the main conversation is going to be on storytelling because all of us are Africans and we have heard and listened to somebody telling a story. There's gossip in the village, and the importance of that gossip is that it keeps us together, it keeps us engaged, it keeps us, like knowing what is happening within our communities, which is why storytelling is very important. But I think what we perhaps struggle with is translating research stories into stories that are understood by people outside of our immediate community. If you are an astronomer, your issue is telling the story outside of the astronomy community. But this is important because funding relies on you being able to tell your story. Policy positioning is also dependent on you being able to tell your story. Communities around you and around where your observatory is depend on how you tell that story. And so this is very, very important. So I think more than anything, what we have to look at is why do we want to tell a story? That's number one. So once you know why you have to tell the story, then you are able to think about the technique in which you tell the story. And you also think about the intention. What do you intend doing with the story when you are telling the story? So for instance, my research, I'm interested in understanding how organizations relate to their communities or to the communities around them. And this is important because the communities around where observatories are they are the main stakeholder. And you are able to understand then what the issues might be and how the organization can adapt in order to accommodate those people in the ways in which they engage with the work that the observatory or whatever science institute is doing. So whatever research, I mean, no matter how complex it is, there is a goal. So there is a goal in terms of why you are doing your science. There is also a goal in terms of why you have to communicate outside of the scientific domain. So once you know that, then you are able to then pitch your story to your communications person. On occasion, you will find, or I have noticed that a lot of astronomers will come and say, I have this exciting paper. And then when you ask the question, what is it exactly that is exciting about it? And you realize that it is exciting in the way that they are pitching the story for other scientists. They have not thought about the audience that is outside, and yet they want a press release to be written about their work. So I think what is key here is to not only think as a scientist, you also have to think as a storyteller within and outside. So for instance, when we talk about, because I think this is the story that we usually able to tell, when we talk about telescopes, we don't only talk about telescopes in the sense that they're doing science, but there is also the element of science engagement there. And so when we're talking to people who are from government, we will talk about the science, yes, because you want to highlight the relevance of the telescope within the scientific community, and you will highlight the number of people who are using the telescope. But more than that, you will also link it to the policy in terms of how that telescope then also plays a role in terms of engaging the people within, the country or within where the observatory is located. So in South Africa, we have a science engagement strategy that has about 4 pillars. One of those pillars is career options for youth and young people. And then the other one is for science to be known by society. And then the other one is for science to be known not only locally, but also internationally, which then highlights the part about the telescopes not only serving the communities within or the astronomy community within, but it also looks at the community outside. So does it have an international reach? Does it have a local reach? Does it have a continental reach? And then the last part is the engagement of society critically on scientific matters, which then also looks at how science communication is done and science engagement is done. So once you look at, I mean, in your respective countries, I'm sure you have your policies. Once you look at the policy and you say, okay, fine, these are the points, or this is the criteria I have to look at the way in which I tell my story. Does it cut across all of these things? If it doesn't, because sometimes it doesn't, you don't have to force it to cut across all of those angles. But you also have to think about, why is it that the science is so exciting to you? What makes it so interesting? Even if it is abstract, but you have to find a way in which you meet the people. And then when you look at the target audience, I think half of the times when we are doing science engagement, we tend to have a one size fits all kind of story. But then if you think back in the way that your grandmother or your grandparents or people in the community would tell the story, when you are telling a story to a child, you will tell a story such that the child understands. Most of these stories would have warnings, they would have excitement, they would have fun, they would have different voices. But when you're telling a story to a person who's a little bit older than that, the story is no longer told in an entertaining or entertainment fashion. It is told in the manner in which it is meant for this adult, because now you want to share facts, you want to share why the story is important, you want to share what it is that excites you about the story, or what is important to you about knowing a certain thing, or it's just conversational. I bumped into Lebo when I was coming to my office, but our conversation was about this and that and that. And so then you craft the message accordingly in order to fit the audience. But in your mind, mentally, you think about the segmentation of the different audiences. And this happens like in science communication, but sometimes we tend to talk to learners in the same way that we talk to the general public. And we forget that the general public also wants context. And the context for learners is that this applies to me academically, or this applies to me in terms of the curriculum. So the way you will infuse the knowledge is you will link it to the curriculum as you understand it. But if it is somebody who is outside of that community or who's outside of school, what they're interested in astronomy or whatever conversation or whatever science that you're doing is completely different, because they have a different point of view and understanding of certain things. Somebody at the World Conference for Science Journalists was talking about pH and saying that they were struggling to explain what pH is. For a learner who's doing science and doing plant sciences, they will understand this. But then it might be completely different for a person who is a farmer. They understand it completely differently. I don't have the explanation, but I think that their context would be different because they're using their soil, they are tilling their land constantly, and they will have ways in which they will tell where the kind of pH there is in their soil and all of that. So the point is, whenever we are thinking about a story, we must always think about the context of the person so that we meet each other halfway. Because what happens is that we all exist in our own little context, and our context, there is the scientific context and then there's the social context, and in all of these contexts there is the in between where we have to meet, and that is the point where we have to think about how then do we engage. And sometimes you find that scientists will assume that people don't know things, or society doesn't know things. And this, I think, is where we miss the point and we miss each other. But if we were to sit down and understand that there is something that I can learn from you and there is something that you can learn from me, then we engage in an open discussion and an open dialogue about how we can each enrich each other's knowledge. You with your science and me with my non-scientific background or non-hard sciences background, and then we'll be able to understand each other. So the crafting of the message is also very important, and it has to align with the target audience that you are intending to talk to, and the proper segmentation as well. Because, just because we are the public, we don't all understand things the same way, which is why then the breakdown of the different audiences is very key, because students are also part of the general public. They could also be students within astronomy, they could also be students outside of astronomy. And then there are other scientists and other researchers who don't exist within the construct of astronomy, they exist in other constructs, so their own understanding of astronomy is completely different to the understanding that astronomers would have. And then we have journalists. And the reason we are having this conversation is so that you can translate your story such that it appeals to the journalists. And you have to understand that journalists are not writing for themselves. They are an intermediary between society and scientists. So when you tell your story to a journalist, you must also imagine that this information is going to be synthesized and translated such that it is understood by people who will read the article or who will listen to radio. And so instead of you saying, oh, if I tell the journalist my story, then the journalist is going to misconstrue the facts. Think about how you are telling the story to the journalist such that they don't end up like misrepresenting your facts or misrepresenting your quote or whatever. And this is very important. This is very important because so many people miss out on the opportunity to actually use that information properly. So since this is important, when you are thinking about your story and you're saying, I have a story, Tembela, I have a story, and I think my story is exciting. You have to also understand that while your paper is 10 pages and you have all the graphs and everything or the figures that you want everyone to know about, they're not necessarily as exciting as they would be to me if you don't explain the story to me. But also use your words and use your words properly. And so what we want here is why this is important and what is it about and how it was done and also why is it important that you tell this story and also what is the point where are we going with all of this like you have discovered a planet. Is it a planet that is likely to inhabit people? Can we move there? Why is it so important? What is the future research that you will do afterwards? And also, is it just a once-off thing, or is it a science is it research that you can do more, like even more, or is there an avenue for it to be continuous? Because I think at the core of these questions, we also want to understand that these instruments or the astronomy infrastructure that governments invest in are not a once-off thing or are not going to sit there and not do anything and they become museums. We want to understand where our money goes, and why, like is the future in the research. And I think the question about where is it going in the future is to understand that other scientists are also going to continue the work and therefore there will be continuous use of the instruments. So while the paper would take on a longer explanation where you go into details about things and also the things, or your research would go into details about every single thing that you have studied. Here we want succinct points. We want to know what is important. What about research? What about your research is worthy of covering in what is worthy of a press release, for instance? And many, many astronomers, when you ask this question, they tend to think that you don't want to tell their story. And then they lose interest or they feel like, oh, a communications person is very difficult. But then, your first point of vetting if your story is relevant or if your story is interesting. I mean, it might be relevant in your field, but if it's not interesting, or if you're not presenting it in a way that is interesting, then the very first person before you get to a journalist that will vet your story is your media person. They want to know what is important about it. And you have to be able to tell that story within and also outside. And another very, very important thing is that when you are thinking about it and you have these fears that a lot of scientists have and think, oh, when I'm telling my story and I'm being asked, give evidence, give us background, give us the logic, give us the details, give us this. I feel like these people don't understand the science. Take a moment to think about why you decided to do, to pursue that research? What made it so interesting for you that you are doing that you did that study? You study galaxies, and what about these particular galaxies that is so interesting, and what makes it worth storytelling? And if you cannot explain that even to yourself, then perhaps there isn't much to share, or you have to really sit down and think deeply about why you're doing what you're doing. And also another thing that might be useful is to as you so if you see that there is an opportunity for you to write a press release or to share your story, it might be worth sitting down and saying, okay, fine, I have a story. If I were to tell the story to I don't know, to your partner who's not a scientist like you, what would I say? What would I say I did today? Because that's, that exactly is storytelling. You get home and somebody asks you, so how was your day today? oh, my day was like this. I studied this, I published a paper, and my paper is about this and that and that. That's the summary. Not in the way that you would write your abstract, but you tell the story in a different way. You say, I did this and I did that and I did that, and this is why it is important, and we are likely to learn whatever. That's your press release, basically. And so when you think like that outside of your field, then you are able to then explain the story properly. And if you get follow-up questions from a person who's not a scientist, then you must also understand that you were able to tell the story properly. Because half of the times, because astronomy is such an esoteric topic, it is very difficult for journalists or for other people outside of your field to ask questions, because sometimes you come with these different acronyms. I remember once somebody was talking about NGC, and I was like, what the hell is NGC? So I think sometimes you're not conscious about the language that you are using that then excludes the person who's supposed to be helping you tell your story. So you have to almost strip yourself of all the, because I mean, you know so much about your field and you understand so much, and now you assume that everyone is like that. So you almost have to strip yourself of that knowledge and say, okay, fine, I'm telling a story for the first time. So when I'm telling the story for the first time, what is it exactly that is important? What did I learn from this research? And once I know what we learned from this research, and then I ask the question, why is it so important that it is worthy of people helping me to write about it? Once you get that, then you get to a point where you ask yourself, how did we do it? How did we get to know what we know? And then once you get there, how did we get to know what we know? Then you can also expand on the other things, like this is building on whatever work, or this is new work. And the reason we're saying it's new work is because our point of view is this and that. And then you highlight the point of why it is important. And then you can have at the bottom, like the trajectory of the story and everything, like that historical background. And I remember once we were writing a press release about a nebula. And so there was some old information that related to the story. And an Afrikaans journalist said to me, like this last part where you say the least important information, and you return to the source and you kind of tie up everything. They said it made it easier for them to rewrite the press release and to have more depth for the story. So don't shy away from giving more information to say, this is also information that is related to this story or to this discovery, because you understand that people will read information and understand information differently. While you might not necessarily find, the historical background of the story so much more important than another person might. But it doesn't mean that you have to go into details, because sometimes a lot of people want to take us through the whole trajectory as you would write your introduction for your thesis and whatnot. It's not that. It's what is important. You have to highlight the most important things about the history. And it's not just random history, it's history that aligns with the story that you've already told about who, what, where, when, and how. So then you link it such that it makes a logical story, or it has a golden thread. I think in science, sorry, in social sciences, we talk about the golden thread that links all the different chapters of your thesis. And in this case, it's the golden thread that then links your first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, and the last paragraph, because you want your story to be logical and to be understood, and to be like for people to understand it easily. So it is good practice to then sit down. I think this is where you will also have to do your homework. So it will be important to look at your research, and you say, okay, fine, I have this paper. Then now I want to tell the story to a person who is outside of my field. then you follow this sequence where you have this inverted pyramid. And if you were telling the story in a different way in terms of your paper, it would be the other way around, where you have all the information, the historical background, the literature, the blah, 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 all of these things. But then in this case, it has to be like this, and it has to be one pager, because a lot of people I've noticed that tend to want to write 2 pages. This is not a research paper. This is like a simple thing. Journalists are very busy. They're very busy people. They want to get to the story, and they receive a number of press releases. So you want yours to be catchy enough and to be quick to read so that they get the story, and then they end up calling you for an interview. And talking about the calling, getting a call from the journalist. Half of the people will have a good press release with all the information, and it's all ready and it's fantastic, and everyone suddenly is interested in the story. But then they don't tell the communications person that, oh, even though we have a press release out, I'm likely to not be around. Oh, I cannot take calls at this time. Oh, I can't do this. I don't want to do interviews. So when you think about telling your story, you have to do a lot of introspection. Do you want to be called at whatever time to do your interview? If you don't want to do that, then I don't think it's worth writing a press release, because it is not, I don't think, no, it's not, I don't think, I think it's important to understand that if the story is yours, you own the story, and nobody will ever tell the story better than you. So therefore, you have to be there if you truly want media coverage. And I know that there's this ambivalent relationship that scientists have with media. They want media, but they also don't want to answer all the calls and all the requests. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. You put yourself out there, you absolutely have to completely put yourself out there, respond to calls at whatever hours. And sometimes, and this has happened many times, sometimes you are scheduled for an interview, and then another story that is more important than yours then comes up, and you've been waiting, and now you are like, oh, but you it unfortunately doesn't work like that. It's about the urgency of the story. So, but continuously be available, even if your story was not picked up today, or the journalist says, let's reschedule and do the interview tomorrow. And don't lose hope, and don't be disheartened by that. It happens, and it happens to everyone, because stories are not the same, and they are not weighed in the same way. Because if there is an outbreak of I don't know, like COVID again, and your story was on cue and you had an interview, unfortunately COVID is going to precede your story, sadly. And this is the reality of life. So yeah, so think deeply about that. If you want to put yourself out there, be completely out there. Okay. And so then also, in terms of having media coverage and using all the mediums to share your story, please, please listen to your communications person when they are advising you. Ask questions. Don't just, say, oh, but they don't want to help me. Ask questions. And, like if they say, well, there's no story here, ask them, why is it that there's no story? And, then you will learn so much more than just saying, okay, well, they say there's no story. I'll never go back again because, I thought there was a story and they're saying there's no story. Understand why they're saying there's no story. And two, even if there is no story in whatever work that you have right now, nothing stops you from using social media in order to have your story out there. And this is also the social capital that you need in order for media to see you, because many people have said, how do I become visible to media? That's exactly it. Many, 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 many researchers have become more visible because they are on social media. And so if you use social media and you use it correctly, and you're not having controversial topics about things that are unrelated to your science, then people are going to pick up the story. But it has to be a continuous thing. It cannot be a once off thing, because I think sometimes people will post about whatever once and then they move on. If it is your science, sit down, think about what you want to share, and also the nice thing about social media is that you can be informal. You can say, oh, today I have this paper and I feel like sharing because it's exciting to me. And what is exciting about it? This, that. And when we set out to research this story, this is what we had initially wanted to study, but then, data showed us something completely different. This is where we are. And now, in that way, you are also telling people that the scientific method does not necessarily go, it doesn't go one way. It can go many, many, many other ways. And the discovery and the quest for discovery is very broad and wide. That, you have this question and then you end up answering a different question. And another thing about radio, when you have your story, because even if you have it on social media or on your own, or you have it on social media, or you have it via a press release through your institute, you have to prepare for the interviews. Half of the times, people don't prepare for the interviews. They think, oh, that press release will serve as, as the solid ground for me. Think about the likely questions that the journalist might not ask you, and then you fill in those gaps, because while we said the press release has to be one pager, you probably have so much more to say about the story that the journalist might not necessarily have insights on, because you've done the research. They only have the press release. Now, this is an opportunity for you. I guess it's a moment for you to shine, and for you to actually talk about your research in depth. And if you do that radio interview or that TV interview, guess what usually happens? You become the contact person for whatever topic that relates to astronomy, or to your field of research. So you have to prep yourself. You also have to be engaging, and also bring in new insights that are going to enrich the conversation. These things are very important. And another untapped opportunity is there are many, many podcasts now that exist on the continent that are doing science communication, that are doing all sorts of things. All you have to do is to find the podcast and say, I have this story. And using the press release method, you pitch the story yourself, and you say, I'd like to talk about my research. I find it interesting. This is what, this is why, this is who is doing the research, and this is why it is important, and this is how we have done it. And I would like to talk about it in depth with you. And the nice thing about the podcast is that it is archived. And if there is anything that you feel like was not covered, you could still call the podcast host and say, oh, you know what? I listened to the podcast. I realized that I did not mention this, and I find this part exciting and interesting. They might call you again and say, okay, let's have a secondary interview to build up on what you've already said. And with the digital platforms, it's not only social media. I think the conversation Africa is for the whole continent. A lot of scientists write on the conversation Africa. And the nice thing about it is it gives scientists what they love the most: autonomy. So you write the story yourself, and then the journalist is going to vet if it follows the way in which stories are told in a journalistic manner. So you can do that. And nothing stops you from having a blog. Many other, scientists have blogs, and in those blogs, you have what you love the most: your autonomy, and you're telling your story from your own point of view. But then you also have to remember that you are writing the story. Yes, and you are positioning your science, or you are putting your science out there, but you have to think about who your target audience is. if your target audience is scientists, then you're not really doing much science engagement or much science communication. But if you understand that there is a bigger community outside of your domain knowledge people, then you have to think about the style in which you write the story. Are you trying to write the story in the way that makes people understand astronomy topics or astronomy concepts, or are you just writing because you feel like writing? So, because there's also that. But what I've also learned from some journalists is that there are people, or there is a I don't want to say market, but I think that's the word that is coming now. There is a market for people who are into geeking out about science. But I don't think they are people who are non-scientists. It must be people who are scientists. So you might find journalists who really like geeking out about science, but then you might also have a bigger community outside of the geeks who are interested in wanting to understand, why is astronomy important? Why must it be a science that is studied? And why is it, what makes astronomers wake up every single day and decide, oh, I'm gonna do this thing, just like any story, every single one of us knows what drives them and what made them study what they are studying and what makes it so exciting and continuously exciting that every single day they wake up and they are, into this, or they're charged and they want to do what they're doing. So you have to think about that when you are writing for, like when you are doing a podcast. Is this really what you want to do? Talking to the same people that you talk to when you are publishing a paper, or do you want to reach other audiences? And if your intention is to tell a story outside of your scientific community, then think about how you're writing the story so that it is understood, and so that if there are any other media people, they can pick it up. And another very important thing that you can also attach to your story when you're sending it to the media is a short video of of your science, especially because a lot of people are worried about being misquoted. You can have a short video using the same principles of writing the press release. You want to tell your story, a short 5-minute video, and journalists are likely to use that also when they are publishing the story, especially now with the online platforms, because many journalists or many media houses have an online platform. So if you have a video that is attached to your story, it's easy for them to actually just, like embed it onto the story. And you get both ways of communicating your press release out there, and you attach your video to it. So don't ever discount many, many forms of communicating your science so that it is easier for them to use it. But it also makes it easier for them to quote you on their press release. And another important thing is infographics. So very recently, I think it was during the G20, somebody was saying, oh, there was a health science journalist group that published a paper. I think it was published in the Daily Maverick, and they said they're going to publish the data. I did not see the data. So if at the top of your infographic, you're saying, I want to present whatever, let the information underneath link to the heading, because if it's something else, then you're going to lose the audience completely. And the infographics are also very, very nice in terms of communicating and making things succinct and understandable. So you can use them, and there are many examples online where you can do that, where you can see how people have used infographics to explain their science, or to explain a story, or to explain whatever. I mean, a lot of people who are using social media, influencers and all of that, they use infographics, and you get to know whatever, and you can add your hyperlinks to the paper if you want. You can add hyperlinks to your video where you are summarizing your science. You can add so many things, and you can communicate just in one infographic that has all the information. So there are many ways to tell the story, and to tell the story to different people and in different ways. But you have to understand that you cannot have, a story for learners in the same infographic for the public because the context is completely different. If you have chosen the learners, stick to the learners, align the messaging to the curriculum. If you want to align it to the curriculum, if you want to align it to something else, align it to something else. But understand that these are completely different audiences who understand things completely differently and who have worldviews that are completely different. And you can also have nice posters. And posters now are very easy to design, and you can just have all the different points about your science. But the essence of it is, why is the story important? And why does it matter so much so that I have to listen, that my neighbor has to listen to you telling your story? So you really have to think about that and not say, oh, it's science, therefore it's very important. No, it's not science, therefore it's very important. What is important about your science that makes it worth listening to? So this is very important. I think I I think with the social sciences, we have a way in which in a way in which it makes it so easy to understand why your science is important, because we have a point in the proposal, in the research proposal, where you have to explain the significance of the study. And the significance of the study cuts across. So you look at the significance of the study in terms of research output, in terms of how it advances scholarship, and then you look at it in terms of the theoretical frameworks that you're going to use that are applicable outside of research, the applied part of your research. And once you understand those things, then it's easy to translate that information and know for sure that if I'm talking to a person who is, a policymaker, this is what is key for them. My research aligns to the policies of the country in this way. And if I'm talking to a person who is within my field of research, they are interested in A, B, C, and D. So then it makes, thinking so much easier. And I'm sure even when you are applying for funding, there is an aspect in South Africa with the National Research Foundation. There is an aspect where you have to highlight that you're going to do engagement or science engagement. And in that science engagement, that's where you have to think about, what is it that I will, once I find out what I want to find out, what is it exactly that I'm going to do to translate my science in order for the general public or learners, whatever the audience is, to understand my work. And also, what will I need? Will I need science communication people to help me with an exhibition so that I can have a small exhibit around my science? Or will I have a recorded video? Or will I use my digital platforms in order to communicate my science? Will I use, print and digital media, radio, whatever, in order to tell my story? But when I think about these things, what is it exactly that I will want them to know about my science? Because for my community, my research community, this is what they will want to know. But for this audience, what will they want to know out of this science? And then you can think about those things. Then you are also able to build in the resources that you will need so that you are able to then do your science engagement and your science communication so that everyone knows and understands your science. And I think we have covered most of the helpful um, tips on how to do these things, like talking to media. But I think they are worth repeating. Prepare for interviews, because when we don't prepare for interviews, you will always say things. I once listened to a researcher talking about their work, and then they were asked a question they could not explain, because I imagined that they had not sat down and thought about what it is exactly that they want people to know. What is the take home really? What do you want people to talk about after listening to your interview? Do you want them to say, oh, there was a scientist on radio today. I don't know what they were talking about, but they were like they use salt telescope. I don't know what it is that they studied with salt. And another thing that is very important because, when we speak, we sometimes stumble over words. You have to practice your interview. Think about what it is that you're doing. Even when you are running, you think about, okay, fine. If I get this question, or if I don't get this question, how do I bring in this important thing about this exciting part about my research so that they know that, I'm so excited about this study and it's worth listening to. And if anyone out there wants to invite me to give a public talk, they must know that this is so important. And we can tell also as people who are listening when a person is excited about their research and when a person is not excited about their research. They're just doing it because, oh, it's good to do, and this is what is expected of me, and I also want funding for my institute, so I have to tell the story. And more than anything, other people will have a storyboard. What, why, who, how, all of these things. Once you have all of these things, then you are able to think broadly about your research and about how you want to tell your story. And because it is a pitfall of a lot of people who are doing research, science, scientific research, or social scientists, hard sciences, all of these people, we tend to use a lot of jargon, or we are not, like we're not clear about what it is that we want to tell. Be clear, be clear. What is it exactly you want to tell? Because your story has many, many, many things. Like I said, with the significance of the story. If I'm going to talk to other public relations people, I have to talk about how public relations is advancing science communication. What is it? Are we looking at strategic public relations, or are we using corporate communication? These are the people who are interested in the theories of communication. So I already know that if I'm presenting within the faculty or to people who are scholars in public relations, that's what I'm going to say. But if I'm presenting to students at the university, they want to understand how all of this, my research is applied in the world of work. And the same goes for people who are outside of, the academy, who are not learners, but who are working in organizations. They want to know, how can we improve the way in which we engage with society using science as a commodity of trade? What is it exactly that we're missing? How are we doing this? And if this is how we are doing it and we are not advancing, what is missing? That's the information that they are interested in. So you can think of those things within your research. What is it exactly that will appeal to the general public out of your research? And nobody, absolutely nobody, wants you to minimize your work, because a lot of people tend to think that when you're translating your work for the general public, then you are minimizing your meaningful contribution to science. No, you are actually saying, I am able to hold different views, or sorry, different ways or constructs. I can exist within the scientific construct. I can also exist within the public construct, because you are not only a scientist, you are a scientist and you are also a member of society. But how do you bring society within your work such that society understands why your research is important and why we should care and why it should continue to be funded? So that to what end do we have to fund do we have to fund astronomy? Why can't we just why can't we just fund health? Because our well-being is more important. So you have to think about those things, and also making your science relatable. And I think of all the theories that I like in science communication is the contextual one, because once we understand the context of the story, we're able to follow the story. And the context does not necessarily have to appeal to my way of doing things, but it has to appeal to me understanding your story. So why? Like, why? Tell me why. And so when I ask the why, I'm not saying what you have done is minimal, but it's me wanting to understand the context of your story and of your research. And in that way, then you inspire critical thinking. So then, because now in the way that you tell the story, I'm going to be critical about how you arrived at that place. And but a lot of scientists tend to have an issue with people who are critical and who are not scientists or specialists in the same field of science. But the critical thinking is exactly what some of the policies of engagement or government policies want us to be. Because what we want to understand is it a worthy cause to fund or to do this kind of research? And I'm not only asking in order to understand if your research is really worthy. I want to understand as a whole, as a body of knowledge, is it worthy? Because you don't know, maybe somebody in my household might be interested in pursuing a career in astronomy, but what do I tell them if I don't ask critical questions, if I'm not allowed to critique what you are telling me so that I understand, and then I can translate and transfer that knowledge to another person and say it is a worthy cause. It might not necessarily solve today's problems, but we understand things that we wouldn't otherwise understand if we did not have these people doing this kind of science. And another thing, like I said earlier, there was somebody who was talking about NGC and whatnot. You also have to root out the use of jargon when you are talking to other people. But at the same time, you want to understand why certain information is misunderstood in society so that you can root out the flow of bad information. Because when you don't understand the origin of the story, like, for instance, people will say, oh, there are 9 planets. If you're outside of that field and the person says, oh, no, no, but it's eight. And then I say, but why is it eight? And you're like, oh, but just pick up a book. Clearly, you don't want me to understand. Think about it. This is a moment for you to explain why we departed from 9 to 8. What then happens, you can explain. So you can talk about the solar system in much depth than just being dismissive. So you want to be able to be to be knowledgeable enough to share information with other people and demystify science and all of these things that are surrounding the mystery around astronomy or any other field for that matter. And I think whenever people are asking, how do we know what we know? A lot of people tend to be impatient with non-scientists asking that question. How do we know what we know? For instance, I noticed that there were a lot of scientists who were like, I guess it was difficult for them to explain because there was a question around the vaccines that we've had for COVID-19. So people wanted to know, how is it that we managed to have a vaccine for COVID-19 when we live in a continent that is ravaged, and in particular in South Africa, we have, like high numbers of people who are HIV positive. So people want to understand, how is it that it is quick, or it was quick to do this? So no one could explain this. Instead, they were like, oh, but you are rejecting science, blah, 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 blah. So you're trying to infer things to people when people actually want to understand the nature of science. What happens? And nobody wants to talk about the willingness to invest so much money in order to find a solution so that society cannot be, what is it, decimated by COVID-19. So I think whenever you get a question as a scientist, you must appreciate the question because people want to know. And I'm absolutely not saying that sometimes people don't feel like, like this is so easy, but understand that this is a corridor in which we can build bridges, and we can also build trust between society and science. You ask questions, answer the question, explain the question, explain the answer. Or if you can't explain the answer because you don't know where the thought process is coming from, be curious, ask the question, why are you asking this question? You might learn so much, and it might help you in the ways in which you clarify and explain your science, because now when you are talking to media or anyone, you will anticipate the kind of questions that exist in society or in the world that you no longer inhabit. That, oh, like, I had this kind of question, so it's possible that this thinking is coming from here. Or then you are open and you say, explain your train of thought so that I understand. And more than anything else, everyone loves research. You can go to any community, people will look at the sky, will look at the environment, will look at many things. They will look at insects and all of that. And all of this makes them understand whether they're going to have good harvest or not good harvest or rain or whatever. People are curious about the environment around them. They're curious about the scientific pursuit because of its beauty and because it gives us life. So when you have knowledge, share the knowledge with other people because we're curious. We want to know. So yes. So on that lovely note, I think I'm done, Lebo. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sister Mbela. I really appreciate that. I think there are a lot of questions. I'm expecting a lot of questions from the session, right? So thank you so much for that wonderful
Sure.
presentation. And I think for now, I think let's then open up the floor for any questions. For those who do have, I think you can even see the hands. For those who do have questions, I think feel free to maybe ask your questions either in the chat box or feel free to also open your mic. Unless your presentation was so good that no one has questions for you.
I think I have a question. How have any of the people here struggled with telling their story? Like what has been the experience? Anyone can answer the question. Oh.
Uh, that's fine. While we're still waiting for them to also ask those questions, I think there is something in the
Yeah,
chat too.
so I think the question is, are there recommended affordable journals to share astronomy outreach and educational material, especially with the current high article, whatever? So I think the what is it, the communicating astronomy with the public journal is free. Duduzile can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's free. So they publish most of the work around outreach and some science communication. But there are also some open source journals. I remember I published my commentary on the South African Journal of Science. I think that's open source and it's funded by some government, South African government, I don't know, but you can find out. So and I think even with cultural astronomy stories, you can. I'm not sure if there is a specific journal, but I think with the communicating astronomy with the public, you can do that. You can share, your cultural astronomy stories. So AI in science communication. You know what? I have no answer there. Sorry. But I think Surab has a question. I think if there is anyone else around here who has an answer around AI in science communication, I do want to also put a disclaimer there that I'm so old that I'm scared of AI. So, so yeah, Lebo would probably have more knowledge about how to use AI. So I'm sorry. Surab, please ask your question.
Hello, hi. Uh, so,
Hi.
so my question comes from a recent presentation that I was trying to make. It was about introducing myself and about the work that I do. So, just an introduction about myself. I work for LIGO India. It's an upcoming gravitational wave detector. But what I struggled with was that the presentation was limited. There was a time constraint of 15 minutes, and within that 15 minutes I had to introduce myself, my work, whatever I have done. And so it was difficult because since I have a 2 or 3 years of experience, how to constrain it, how to make sure that the point is reached, and what all should I include into my presentation and what should I not? Let's say about my work, or something about, let's say,
Mhm.
if there's a time concern, what should I include and what should I not, is what I'm actually struggling with right now. Understand?
So you know what, I think this is the only presentation where I've had too many slides. I believe that if you have a story to tell, it doesn't have to be long. Because what you have to look at basically is, why is your story important? And like I said before, once you know the audience you want to tell the story to, you have results. You're talking to researchers and you have results. So focus on the results, and then you focus on the how you have done the science, and then and then you can add other information, because people are interested, like people in your field are interested in why your research, like what is it that was found, and why is it important, what was the method. But I think also it's very difficult to transition from writing a long document that is your thesis to writing a
Mhm.
paper to also synthesizing it to a presentation. It's very hard. That's why you have to ask your question, what is the story I want to tell to this group? Which is why at the beginning I was talking about the segmentation of the audience. Because once you know the audience, then you know exactly what you have to say to them.
Okay.
And also try as hard as you can to have fewer slides. Because the minute you have a lot of slides, you're going to have unnecessary information. But when you confine yourself to just 2 or 3 slides, then you know that your information has to be contained within those 3 slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We have one comment from Tobekile in the comments. I don't know if she's able to open a mic, or maybe you can read the comment.
Okay, yeah. Tobegile, do you want to say something?
Hi.
Hello.
I just was sharing a comment with the question that you asked about one thing that we've sort of faced when sharing our science. And for me, it's maintaining that enthusiasm when you meet people who just do not believe the science you're trying to share. It's always difficult to, I don't know, keep going on about it when they just keep shooting down actual facts. So yeah.
I think I saw somewhere that sometimes when we are pushing facts down the throats of people, people tend to reject the information. But we never stop. I think I've said it at the end of the presentation. We never stop to actually ask the question, why is it that you think this is not a fact? Or why is it that you have a different view about this? Because now, when you are curious about their position and their understanding of the world, then you also learn for future and also for this conversation. So that one, you don't waste your time explaining facts and whatnot. You ask the question, why is it that you think this way? Like not in the way of, well, why is it that you think this way? Like in a dismissive way, but in the way that you are really, truly curious. Because I think sometimes when people are asking us questions, we already think that they don't know, they don't want to know what I know. So I have to convince. No, sometimes you don't even have to convince, just listen, you know.
Yeah, yep, I get it. Not to be dismissive, but just try and open conversation. I guess that could work.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. And you will find that they will actually be more enthusiastic and more open to learning more once you get to understand. Because I think also what we forget in conversations, we also want to contribute something, whether what I want to contribute is related to what you are saying or not related to what you are saying. But I know things too. I want to say something. So that's when you have to then say, I would like to understand your point of view. Why is it that you think like this and I think like this? And you will have a completely different conversation.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I don't see any other comments. Oh, Nikita. Okay. Yeah. Nikita, go ahead.
Hi, Timela. Thank you so
Hello.
much for the workshop. It's really cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think my experiences of question is on the same line of what Tobekile was saying, where, you know, I do presentations for school and the public in the Wits Digital Dome. And a lot of the time you feel like you hit some kind of wall when you try and communicate with someone, especially if they have, in my experience, like prior beliefs due to culture, you know, so stories from their culture about astronomy, about the stars, about space. So I've been, you know, I've been told that, yeah, like by one of the teachers that, you know, it's okay, you've said this stuff, it's fine for the kids, but I know the truth that, like, you know, we can't, there's like a sphere that we can't leave, we can't go beyond this point. And you know, and I try to do what you said and sort of graciously and respectfully take it forward. But in those situations where it's like, you know, you hit a wall where it's like, I would ask, okay, and then I started talking about the moon and you know, how we ventured there and how we, you know that we've gone there and things like that. But it's very much sort of no, that's not real, that's not true. So what do you do? What do you recommend for those kind of situations?
It's very interesting because at the science forum there was a lady who said in their religion women are not supposed to touch anything during the solar eclipses and all of that. And you know, the only way I could have the conversation was to say, you know, in my culture, I don't even remember what it is, you know, that people can and cannot do. And me saying that allowed her to explain more about, you know, the religion, what the Hindu religion and how things are. So I think what is more important, I think I mean, even with the theories of science communication, dialogue only happens when we are open to learning and listening to other people. And yes, the person is saying something completely different to what you think has to be applicable in the curriculum. But having that dialogue also makes it easier for you to understand society's way of understanding certain concepts. And once you understand certain concepts, then you are also able to infuse these things into research because then or into improving your communication because without knowing how other people receive information, we're never going to improve our, you know, our social science or science communication engagement because this engagement relies on both parties participating and also bringing in their own views because while you are bringing in your scientific view, they have their own cultural view and they also have their own religious views. So you cannot dismiss these things, they can coexist. And so the only thing that is important is for these things to meet somewhere, you know, where the social culture and the scientific culture can coexist. And we're able to understand that there are certain things that we can and cannot say because we would be dismissing other people. But facts are facts. But at the same time, you don't push down the facts through people's throats. So we have to be kinder towards each other. It's gonna take a long time because it's not a place we have been. I mean, science communication in South Africa, and I'm sure even in other parts of the continent, is very new and it's very young. So it will grow as we are open to having more conversations to understand each other's contexts. So there's somebody who's talking about science communication using theater and arts. You know, I don't know. So we used to have an event in Grahamstown. It was called SciFest, and there used to be art students from Rhodes University who would perform, and they would perform scientific things. But I don't think we have any other people doing that. And I'd like to think that, oh, and I saw it in Morocco. Yes, in Morocco, there was a puppet show that was done by kids. And there was also a person who read a book and was performing the book in front of the small kids. I think they were in grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3, those grades, like the lower grades. And they were explaining astronomy concepts. And I think they were talking about going to the moon. And so I think there is a greater opportunity to do that and to also tell the story. One of my friends has translated what is it? I think what is that guy's name? The one who wrote The Theory of Time. I think it's his daughter who wrote the book, The Key to whatever. So they translated it into isiXhosa. I'm not sure if it has taken off yet, but there are many other ways in which science can be brought into languages and cultures and arts and theater and in those ways in order to make it accessible and understandable to society. So yes, I agree that science communication using theater and arts would probably be, like would probably have more traction than ever before. Inas, there's a question. Is it Inas?
Yeah, so it's not like a big question, but
Yeah.
like from what I got from the workshop, that you can take like science communication other skills while you are a scientist. So what if I want like to do science communication as career? Is it like have opportunities in Africa? Is it there? So is it doable? Something like that.
I think universities like Stellenbosch offer science communication degrees. And there is quite a lot that can be done in terms of science communication research and science communication as a practice. So I would like to think that there is a great opportunity. I have found myself doing research in public relations and science communication. I never intended to. I was just curious about relational communication. But now I realize that if I'm studying communities around observatories, the only commodity of trade there is science. So then, naturally, the ways in which I have to understand things is to use science communication. So you might want to interrogate your position. Why is it that you want to venture into science communication? What are your interests? And why is this important to you or important in your country or in terms of the policies of your country? What is it that is missing? Does that help, Ines?
Yes, but like the real question is I'm someone from science background, so it's gonna like be easier like to move just like from the science or not to move, it's just to upgrade and get the degree in science communication, which like your background in science can help you to perform, let's say, well, but I don't think it's matter of that, but yeah, that my question is like from science background, is it easier or it's just fine? Or it's easier to get the opportunities?
Nikita, would you like to come in? You are a scientist and you are doing science communication.
Sure. So we're talking, sorry, just to clarify, we're asking about opportunities, like job opportunities in science communication.
Yes.
So, I've brought this up a few times. I think, like Timbela says, it's a new concept, or it's new to us that we're implementing this in South Africa and Africa, but elsewhere in the world, it's quite, normal or expected that any self-respecting astronomy department would have a dedicated, science communications or outreach officer or something of the sort. It has happened at a few institutions in Africa, but not that many. It's quite hard to find the sort of funding or to get universities to see the real need or value in creating permanent positions at actual institutions. I hope that this will change going forward. I'm still trying to sort of Hi, sorry, I think my connection dropped there.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you caught?
That it is still growing.
Oh no, okay, I said a lot after that. Yes, it's so outside of Africa, it is very in a astronomy department, for example, to have a dedicated science communicator as part of that department, who does a whole range of things. And this is it still needs to um, sort of materialize here. I think in South Africa, there's one or two that do have these positions available, but I think it's still something that we are trying to make, departments see the value in or having these things. And to find kind of permanent positions in this field is a bit hard, but you can also, they are becoming more open to the idea of someone um, who is doing sort of research in science communication, holding some kind of faculty position where they do this research and then they actually implement or practice the science communication and outreach as well alongside it. So I think for the time being, it's a bit tough to find those roles within Africa. Um, but I'm hopeful that the number of opportunities will continue to grow because everyone, especially in South Africa, they talk about transformation and, long term and these kinds of things. So yeah, it's part of that effort. It's part of this picture that these things are necessary. And often a university department will expect their faculty and students to kind of do these things in their free time. And that is great. It does happen, and it is obviously having an impact. But in order to have long-lasting or sustainable impact and you need these kind of well-developed programs that can be put into place, and that can only be done by somebody who's fully dedicated to these efforts. So I hope so in the future that this will grow.
So, but at the same time, to add to what Nikita is saying, I don't think there's anything stopping you right now from actually starting to work on science communication, translating your work, and engaging on all the social media platforms, creating videos and stuff like that. Who knows, once you are well established on the socials, people might be interested in your work and interested in talking to you, and you likely to create your own position within the place of work where you are. Think about it along those lines. Like, how do I make sure that I do or I transition to the person I would like to be going forward by just doing the little bits that I can right now to translate science because I'm a scientist, I know science, but how do I communicate my science and continuously build a profile around that?
Yeah, okay, that is very good. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I do not see any other questions, but in the meantime, I guess maybe we can close the session. Maybe I should open up for the last questions in case they are there, right? Before I even move towards closing, right? Are there any last questions or comments that anyone wants to put forth? As a reminder, I think the session was recorded and live streamed to YouTube. So if you ever wanna go back and re-listen to anything that was said in today's session, you can always find it on the Breaks Astronomy YouTube channel. I think it'll be ready available for you to look at it again. But seeing that there are no questions, Sister Mbela, thank you so much for blessing us with all the information that you had. I think that was that was a very detailed presentation that you gave with so many nuggets that we can take home and see how we can apply them within our different fields and positions within different organizations, right? We truly appreciate it. And from us, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for attending. Bye.